I'm Rebecca. You're so embarrassing, Mom. Just leave. My daughter Natalie hissed at me during her 18th birthday party in front of 50 of her closest friends. She didn't care that I'd worked 3 jobs to pay for that party. She didn't care that I'd spent my last savings on her designer dress. She just wanted me gone because I'd accidentally spilled punch on her boyfriend's expensive sneakers while serving guests. But she was about to learn the hard way what embarrassing really meant, because that night, I walked out with her $47,000 college fund, and 3 days later, federal agents knocked on our door in Millbrook Heights. Suddenly, the same daughter who mocked me went completely silent. I thought taking that money would teach her gratitude. I had no idea it would expose the lies our entire family had been living for the past decade. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Riverside Country Club sparkled under string lights that October evening, its manicured lawns stretching toward the lake like something out of a magazine. I stood behind the dessert table in my discount store blouse, watching my daughter hold court in a dress that cost more than my monthly rent. Natalie looked radiant, her auburn hair cascading in perfect waves, her smile bright enough to light up the entire pavilion. She was everything I dreamed she could be: confident, popular, destined for greatness. But I was the shadow in her spotlight. "Mrs. Crawford," Natalie's best friend Jasmine whispered as she approached the table, "could you maybe serve from the kitchen? Some of the parents are asking if you're, the help?" Her tone was gentle, but the words cut deep. I'd known Jasmine since she was 7, had driven her to soccer practice countless times when her own mother was too busy with charity galas. I forced a smile and nodded, retreating toward the kitchen entrance. Through the glass doors, I could see my ex-husband Richard mingling effortlessly with the other parents, his new wife Camille draped on his arm like an expensive accessory. He wore success like cologne, too much of it, overwhelming everyone around him. When he caught my eye through the glass, he didn't wave. He just looked away, as if acknowledging me might somehow diminish him. That's when I saw him. Bryce Wellington, Natalie's boyfriend of 6 months, strutting across the patio in pristine white sneakers that probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget. His father owned half the commercial real estate in Millbrook Heights, and Bryce carried himself like he owned the other half. He was handsome in that entitled way that wealthy teenagers often are: sharp jaw, perfect teeth, and the kind of confidence that comes from never being told no. "Becca," Natalie's voice cut through my thoughts. She was waving me over with that particular smile she used when she needed something. "Could you bring some punch to Bryce? He's thirsty." I lifted the crystal pitcher, borrowed from the country club's premium service, and made my way across the crowded patio. Parents stepped aside as I passed, their conversations pausing just long enough to remind me I didn't belong. The October air was crisp, carrying the scent of expensive perfume and autumn leaves. That's when disaster struck. As I approached Bryce, who was regaling a group of his friends with some story about his upcoming ski trip to Aspen, my heel caught on an uneven stone in the patio. The pitcher tilted, and bright red punch cascaded down like a waterfall, soaking Bryce's pristine sneakers and spattering across his khaki pants. The entire patio went silent. Bryce stared down at his ruined shoes, his face cycling through shock, disbelief, and finally rage. "Are you kidding me right now?" he shouted loud enough for everyone to hear. "These are limited edition Louboutins. Do you have any idea how much these cost?" "I'm so sorry," I stammered, dropping to my knees with napkins, trying to clean the mess. "I'll pay for them. Mom?" Natalie's voice cracked across the patio. She stormed over, her face flushed with humiliation. Every eye was on us now. 50 teenagers and their parents watching our family drama unfold like a reality TV show. "It was an accident, honey," I said quietly, hoping to de-escalate. "You're so embarrassing, Mom," she hissed, her voice carrying across the silent patio. "Just leave. Please, you're ruining everything." She turned to Bryce, her voice switching to syrup-sweet concern. "Baby, I'm so sorry. She'll pay for new ones. Won't you, Mom?" I stood slowly, feeling every stare, every judgment, every whispered comment about the divorced woman who couldn't even serve punch without causing a scene. Richard was nowhere to be seen, probably hiding in the bathroom until the embarrassment passed. Camille was standing by the bar, shaking her head with that sympathetic smile, wealthy women perfect for occasions like these. "Won't you, Mom?" she repeated, her voice harder now. I looked at my daughter, this young woman I'd raised alone after Richard left, whose homework I'd helped with while working double shifts, whose dreams I'd funded with overtime pay and sacrifice. I saw her standing there in her designer dress, surrounded by her privileged friends, asking me to pay for shoes that cost more than some families spend on groceries in a month. "No," I said quietly. The word hung in the air like smoke. Natalie blinked, confused. "What?" "No," I repeated, louder this time. "I won't be paying for the shoes." I set the empty pitcher on the nearest table and reached into my purse, pulling out the envelope I'd brought as a surprise, her acceptance letter to Whitmore University, and the bank statement showing her full college fund. I looked at the faces around me, then back at my daughter. "Happy 18th birthday, Natalie. You're an adult now. Time to start acting like one." I walked off that patio with my head held high, the college fund documents clutched in my hand, leaving behind the shocked silence and my daughter's voice calling after me. I had no idea that this single moment of standing up for myself would unravel secrets that went far deeper than family embarrassment. I had no idea that taking control of that money would lead federal investigators straight to our door. And I definitely had no idea that the real embarrassment hadn't even started yet. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The drive home from Riverside Country Club took 12 minutes, but it felt like hours. My hands gripped the steering wheel of my 10-year-old Honda Civic as I navigated the winding roads of Millbrook Heights, passing mansion after mansion with their perfectly manicured lawns and circular driveways. Each house seemed to mock me, reminders of the life I'd never been able to give Natalie, the world she so desperately wanted to belong to. My phone buzzed incessantly on the passenger seat, text after text from Natalie, each one more frantic than the last. "Mom, what are you doing? Come back right now. Everyone is staring at me. This is so unfair." I turned the phone face down and kept driving. Our apartment complex, Pinewood Gardens, sat on the wrong side of Millbrook Heights, like a poor cousin at a rich family reunion. The paint was peeling, the parking lot had more potholes than asphalt, and the garden was 3 dying shrubs and a patch of brown grass. But it was home. It was what I could afford on my salary as a medical billing clerk at Riverside General Hospital. I climbed the stairs to our second-floor unit, my discount store heels echoing off the concrete steps. Apartment 2B had been our sanctuary for the past 8 years, ever since Richard decided our marriage was limiting his potential and moved in with Camille, whose father owned the largest construction company in 3 counties. Inside, everything was exactly as I had left it that morning. The living room with its second-hand furniture and carefully arranged throw pillows to hide the worn spots. The small kitchen where I had packed countless bag lunches and made dinner from whatever was on sale at the grocery store. The walls covered with Natalie's achievements, honor roll certificates, debate team trophies, college acceptance letters. I walked to my bedroom and opened the bottom drawer of my dresser, moving aside old sweaters to reveal a small metal lockbox. Inside were the documents that represented 18 years of sacrifice. Natalie's college fund statements showing steady deposits from every overtime shift, every skipped meal, every "we can't afford it" Christmas. $47,000. 4 years of tuition at Whitmore University, her dream school. I'd started saving the day she was born, even when Richard complained that we couldn't afford diapers, let alone college. Every tax refund, every bonus, every dollar I could scrape together went into that account. When Richard left, I'd worked 3 jobs to keep those deposits coming. Medical billing during the day, cleaning offices at night, and weekend shifts at a call center that sold extended warranties to people who couldn't afford them. My phone rang. Richard's name flashed on the screen. "Rebecca, what the hell was that?" His voice was sharp, controlled. The voice he used when he was angry but trying to maintain his image. "Camille's friends were there. Do you know how that looked?" "Like a mother who's tired of being treated like garbage by her own daughter," I said, sinking onto my bed. "She's 18 for crying out loud. Teenagers say things they don't mean. You humiliated her in front of everyone."
She humiliated herself and me in front of everyone. There was a pause. I could hear the party continuing in the background. Laughter, music, the clink of glasses. Life going on without the embarrassing mother. Look, I get that your feelings are hurt, Richard continued, his tone softening into the patronizing voice I remembered from our marriage. But this college fund thing is childish. Natalie needs that money. Natalie needs to learn respect.
She needs to go to Whitmore. Do you know how hard it was for me to get her that acceptance? The strings I had to pull? I sat up straighter. What strings? Another pause, longer this time. Nothing, just networking. You wouldn't understand. But I did understand. Richard had always been good at making connections, finding angles, working the system. It's how he'd built his real estate empire after leaving me. It's how he'd managed to pay almost nothing in child support while living in a mansion. "Bring the money back tomorrow," he said, his voice hardening again. "This tantrum of yours has gone far enough." "It's not your money, Richard. It's mine. I earned every penny. And Natalie is my daughter, too. Don't punish her because you're jealous of our life." The line went dead. I sat in the silence of my small bedroom, looking around at the life I'd built through sheer determination. The nursing textbooks on my nightstand. I'd been taking classes to become an RN, one course at a time, paying as I went. The small framed photo of Natalie and me at her high school graduation, both of us beaming with pride. The stack of bills on my dresser, all current, all paid on time, despite having no help from her father. This wasn't jealousy. This was 18 years of exhaustion finally reaching its breaking point. Another text from Natalie. "Dad says you took my college money. Mom, please, I'm sorry about tonight. I was just embarrassed. Please don't ruin my future because of one stupid mistake." One stupid mistake. As if tonight was the first time she'd been ashamed of me. As if the years of eye rolls when I picked her up in my old car, the excuses why I couldn't attend school events in wealthy neighborhoods, the constant comparisons to Camille's designer clothes and perfect life were all just misunderstandings. I walked to the kitchen and made myself a cup of tea, the cheap kind that came in generic boxes. Through the thin walls, I could hear Mrs. Peterson next door watching her evening game shows, the volume turned up too loud. Downstairs, the Martinez family was having their usual Saturday night gathering, children laughing and playing in the courtyard. These were my people, working people, people who understood the value of a dollar because they'd earned every one, people who didn't throw away relationships over spilled punch and expensive shoes. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from an unknown number. "Saw what happened tonight. Good for you. A fellow mom who's been there." Then another. "That girl needs to learn some manners. You did the right thing." And another. "Don't let them make you feel bad. Some of us were cheering for you." I smiled for the first time all evening. Maybe I wasn't as alone as I thought. But as I sat there in my small kitchen, sipping my cheap tea and reading messages of support from strangers, I had no idea that taking control of that college fund would set off a chain of events that would change everything. I had no idea that Richard's networking and string pulling went much deeper than I'd imagined. And I definitely had no idea that by Monday morning, people in expensive suits would be very interested in where that $47,000 had come from and why Richard was so desperate to get it back. Monday morning arrived with the kind of gray drizzle that made Millbrook Heights look less glamorous and more like what it really was, a small town trying too hard to be something it wasn't. I sat at my kitchen table, still in my pajamas at 7 a.m., staring at the college fund documents spread across the surface like pieces of a puzzle I was finally ready to solve. The weekend had been a blur of ignored phone calls and increasingly desperate text messages. Natalie had tried everything. Tears, anger, bargaining, guilt trips that would make a professional manipulator proud. Richard had escalated to threats, mentioning lawyers and parental rights. He'd never bothered exercising when it came to actual parenting. It was even Camille had called, her voice dripping with fake concern about family healing and moving forward. But it was the silence from Natalie Sunday night that worried me most. No texts after 9 p.m., no dramatic phone calls, nothing. For a teenager who usually documented her every breath on social media, radio silence meant she was planning something. My phone rang at exactly 7:15 a.m. Natalie's name flashed. "Mom?" Her voice was small, different. Gone was the entitled princess from Saturday night. This was the little girl who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. "I'm here, sweetheart. I want to come home. Can you pick me up?" I sat up straighter. "Where are you?" "Dad's house. I stayed over after the party, but I want to come home. I need to talk to you." Something in her tone made my chest tighten. "Are you okay? Can you come get me? Please."
45 minutes later, I pulled into the circular driveway of Richard's McMansion in Willow Creek Estates, the most exclusive neighborhood in Millbrook Heights. The house was a monument to excess. 6 bedrooms for a family of 3, a 3-car garage, and landscaping that probably cost more than my annual salary. It had always felt like a fortress designed to keep people like me out. Natalie was sitting on the front steps, looking smaller than I'd seen her in years. She wore yesterday's party dress, now wrinkled and stained, her carefully styled hair falling in tangled waves around her face. Her designer makeup had long since worn off, revealing the exhausted 18-year-old underneath. She climbed into my car without a word, buckled her seatbelt, and stared out the passenger window as we drove away from her father's perfect life. "Do you want to talk about it?" I asked as we turned onto Maple Street, heading back toward our modest side of town. Dad and Camille had a fight, a bad one, after everyone left the party. I kept my eyes on the road, sensing there was more. They were screaming at each other about you taking the college money. Dad kept saying it would ruin everything if you didn't bring it back. Camille was crying, saying she never signed up for this kind of drama. Natalie's voice cracked slightly. Then Dad started making phone calls. Lots of them. To people I'd never heard him talk to before. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. What kind of people? I don't know. He kept saying things like, "We have a situation," and "She doesn't know anything," and "It needs to be handled quietly." She turned to look at me for the first time since getting in the car. "Mom, what college fund are we talking about exactly?" The question hit me like ice water. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I've never seen any statements. I've never signed any papers. Dad always said he was handling my college finances and that I didn't need to worry about the details." Her voice was growing stronger, more focused. "But last night when he was on the phone, I heard him say something about the Whitmore account and how the deposits would look suspicious if anyone started digging." I pulled over into the parking lot of a 24-hour diner, my heart racing. "Natalie, tell me exactly what you heard." She turned in her seat to face me fully, and I saw something in her eyes I'd never seen before. Fear. He was talking to someone about moving money around. He said something about scholarship funds and charitable donations and how the Crawford account was just a pass-through. She swallowed hard. "Mom, what college fund are we talking about exactly?" The world seemed to tilt sideways. I thought about the bank statements I'd been so proud of, the steady deposits over 18 years. I'd assumed they were my contributions, my sacrifices made tangible. But what if there was more to it? "There's something else," Natalie continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "This morning, before I called you, I snuck into Dad's office. I found papers, lots of them, about something called the Millbrook Youth Education Foundation." I felt my blood turn to ice. "What kind of papers?" "Bank records, donor lists." And Mom, she reached into her purse and pulled out a folded document. "Your name is on here. It says you've donated over $300,000 to the foundation over the past 10 years.
I stared at the paper she handed me, my own name printed in black and white, next to an astronomical figure I'd never seen in my life. According to this document, I was one of the foundation's largest contributors, having made regular donations that dwarfed my actual annual salary. "I've never donated money to any foundation," I said, my voice hollow. "Then where did this money come from? And why does it have your name on it?" I looked at my daughter, really looked at her, and saw not the spoiled princess from Saturday night, but a scared young woman who was beginning to realize that her entire life might be built on lies. The same realization that was currently making my stomach churn. "I don't know," I admitted, "but I'm going to find out." We sat in that diner parking lot for another hour going through every document Natalie had managed to photograph with her phone before leaving Richard's house. The picture that emerged was one I couldn't fully comprehend, but that made my skin crawl. The Millbrook Youth Education Foundation appeared to be a charity that provided college scholarships to underprivileged students. According to its website, which Natalie pulled up on her phone, it had helped hundreds of local students achieve their dreams of higher education. The foundation's board included several prominent Millbrook Heights residents, including Richard Crawford, listed as Vice President of Operations. But the bank records told a different story. Large donations came in from individuals and businesses throughout the region, but the money didn't seem to go where it was supposed to. Instead, it moved through a complex network of accounts, with significant amounts ending up in places that had nothing to do with student scholarships.
Including an account with my name on it. "Mom," Natalie said, her voice shaking, "I think Dad has been using your identity to hide money. Lots of money." The implications hit me like a freight train. If Richard had been funneling money through accounts bearing my name, if he'd been using my identity for financial fraud, then I wasn't just an ex-wife he'd abandoned, I was an unwitting accomplice to crimes I didn't even understand. And taking that college fund, money that might not have been legitimate in the first place, was apparently triggering a panic that reached far beyond our family drama. "We need to go to the police," I said. Natalie grabbed my arm. "Mom, what if they don't believe us? What if they think you were involved? Your name is all over these documents." She was right. To an outside observer, it would look like I was deeply involved in whatever Richard was doing. The timing of my discovery, right after our very public argument, would make it seem like I was trying to get revenge by making false accusations. But as I sat there, holding evidence that my ex-husband had been using my identity for potentially criminal activities, I realized I didn't have a choice. The college fund I'd been so proud of might be tainted money. The daughter I'd sacrificed everything for might be the beneficiary of financial crimes I knew nothing about. And somewhere out there, real students who deserved scholarships might have been cheated out of their futures so that Richard could maintain his mansion and Camille could wear designer clothes. "We're gonna figure this out," I told Natalie, folding the documents carefully and putting them in my purse. "But first, we need to understand exactly what we're dealing with." As I started the car and pulled back onto the road, I caught Natalie's reflection in the rearview mirror. She looked older somehow, like the events of the past few days had forced her to grow up all at once. The entitled teenager was gone, replaced by a young woman who was finally seeing the world as it really was. Neither of us knew that by taking those documents, by asking these questions, we'd already set in motion events that would bring federal investigators to our door. Neither of us realized that Richard's panicked phone calls had been to people who had a lot more to lose than just money. And neither of us understood that the college fund I'd taken in a moment of hurt pride was about to become evidence in a federal investigation that would destroy the lives of some of Millbrook Heights' most prominent citizens. By Tuesday evening, the Crawford family had circled their wagons, and I was officially the enemy. The emergency family meeting was called for 6 p.m. at Richard's house, a summons delivered via Camille's perfectly manicured text message that managed to sound both polite and threatening at the same time. "Rebecca, we need to discuss the situation like adults. The entire family will be there, 6 p.m. sharp. Please don't make this harder than it needs to be." I almost didn't go. Natalie begged me not to, sensing the trap that was being set. But I needed to look them in the eye and hear what they had to say. I needed to understand how deep this went and who else knew about Richard's financial schemes. The house felt different when I walked in. Where Saturday night it had been warm and welcoming for Natalie's party, now it felt cold, sterile, like a courtroom. The entire Crawford clan had assembled in the formal living room, a space I'd helped Richard's mother decorate 20 years ago when we were still married and naive enough to believe we were building something permanent. Richard's mother, Constance, sat in the wingback chair like a queen holding court. At 78, she still commanded respect through sheer force of will and old money breeding. Her silver hair was perfectly styled, her pearl necklace catching the light from the crystal chandelier. She'd never forgiven me for trapping her son with an unplanned pregnancy, and the years hadn't softened her opinion. Richard's brother, Marcus, occupied the leather sectional with his wife Linda and their twin boys, who looked mortally embarrassed to be included in this family drama. Marcus ran the family's original construction business, the one their grandfather had started, and he carried himself with the same entitled confidence that seemed to be a Crawford family trait. Camille perched on the arm of Richard's chair, her hand resting possessively on his shoulder. She wore a cream-colored cashmere sweater that probably cost more than my monthly car payment, and her makeup was flawless despite the family crisis we were supposedly navigating. "Rebecca, we need to discuss this situation like adults. The entire family will be there. 6 p.m. sharp. Please don't make this harder than it needs to be."
"This tantrum of yours," Marcus interjected, his voice carrying that particular condescension that wealthy men perfect for dealing with people they consider beneath them. "Taking Natalie's college money because your feelings got hurt at a party." "It's not Natalie's college money," I said evenly. "It's money I saved over 18 years from my own paychecks." Linda spoke up from the couch, her voice soft but cutting. "Money that Richard supplemented significantly, according to the bank records we've reviewed." My stomach dropped. They'd been going through financial records. They knew about the suspicious deposits. "What supplementation?" I asked. Richard cleared his throat, finally speaking for the first time since I'd arrived. "Rebecca, over the years, I've made various contributions to Natalie's education fund. Sometimes directly, sometimes through the foundation I work with. It's all completely legal and above board." "The Millbrook Youth Education Foundation?" I said, watching their faces for reactions. The room went silent. Constance's fingers tightened on her purse. Marcus shifted uncomfortably. Camille's hand moved from Richard's shoulder to her own lap. "You've been busy," Richard said, his voice taking on a harder edge, "snooping through documents that don't belong to you. Documents that have my name on them. Documents that show donations I never made to a foundation I'd never heard of until yesterday." Constance leaned forward in her chair. "Rebecca, dear, you're clearly confused about the family's financial arrangements. Richard has been handling Natalie's education expenses as part of his parental responsibilities. By using my social security number and forging my signature on donation forms?" The accusation hung in the air like smoke. I watched as glances were exchanged around the room, silent communications passing between people who clearly knew more than they were saying. Marcus stood up, his 6'2" frame meant to intimidate. "That's a serious accusation, Rebecca. Do you have any proof of wrongdoing, or are you just throwing around conspiracy theories because you're angry about a teenager's attitude?" "I have bank records showing hundreds of thousands of dollars in donations attributed to me, money I never donated because I don't have hundreds of thousands of dollars." "You have copies of documents you stole from Richard's private office," Camille said, speaking for the first time. Her voice was ice cold. "Documents you had no right to access." I looked at her, this woman who'd replaced me in Richard's bed, who lived in the house I'd dreamed of, who wore clothes I could never afford, and realized she wasn't just the other woman. She was part of whatever this was. "How long have you known?" I asked her directly. "Known what?" She replied, but her eyes gave her away. She knew exactly what I was talking about. "About the foundation, about the money laundering, about using my identity."
Richard stood up suddenly, his face flushed with anger. That's enough. You're making wild accusations based on documents you don't understand, taken from a home you had no right to enter. Natalie took those documents from her father's house, where she has every right to be. Natalie is a confused teenager who's been manipulated by her bitter mother. This is exactly the kind of behavior we worried about when Richard married you. The insult hit its mark, just as it was intended to. 20 years of marriage, 18 years of single motherhood, decades of sacrifice, reduced to bitter mother by a woman who'd never worked a day in her life? Linda, who'd been silent until now, finally spoke up. Rebecca, we understand you're hurt, but you need to think about what's best for Natalie. This foundation has helped hundreds of students get college educations. Are you really willing to destroy something so beneficial because you're angry about a party? I'm willing to get to the truth, even if that truth makes some people uncomfortable. Marcus laughed, a sound with no humor in it. The truth is that you've always resented Richard's success. You've always been jealous of what he's built, what he's accomplished, and now you're trying to tear it down out of spite. What he's built with stolen money and forged documents? What he's built through hard work and legitimate business practices, Constance corrected sharply, something you never understood because you've never had vision beyond your small-minded existence. The words stung because there was just enough truth in them to find their target. I had lived a small life compared to the Crawfords. I had struggled while they prospered. I had worked multiple jobs while Richard networked at country clubs. But I'd done it honestly. You know what I think? Richard said, moving closer to where I stood. I think you're having some kind of breakdown. The stress of raising a teenager alone, your failed attempts at nursing school, your financial struggles. It's all caught up with you, and you're lashing out at the family that's tried to help you. Help me? I couldn't keep the disbelief out of my voice. Richard, you paid less than $200 a month in child support for 18 years. You missed birthdays, school plays, parent-teacher conferences. When exactly did you help me? I helped by staying out of your way so you could do things your way. And I helped by making sure Natalie had opportunities you never could have given her.
With dirty money. With legitimate earnings from successful business ventures, Marcus interjected. Ventures that have benefited this entire community. I looked around the room at these people, Richard's family, who had barely tolerated me during our marriage and actively despised me after our divorce. They were united in their version of reality, a version where Richard was the successful son who'd overcome the burden of an unsuitable wife, where the foundation was a charitable endeavor, where my discovery of the truth was just the desperate flailing of a bitter ex-wife. Give us back the college fund, Camille said quietly. Let Natalie go to Whitmore University. Stop this crusade before you hurt innocent people. Including yourself, Constance added ominously. Rebecca, dear, you should be very careful about making accusations you can't prove. Slander is a serious matter, and false reporting to authorities can have significant legal consequences. The threat was clear. Back down or face legal retaliation from a family with money and connections. I picked up my purse from where I'd set it by the door and looked one more time around the room. These people had been my family once. I'd spent holidays with them, celebrated birthdays, shared meals and laughter, and the normal rhythms of family life. But they'd never really accepted me, and now they were closing ranks to protect their secrets and their lifestyle. Keep the money if it's so important to you, I said quietly, but I'm going to find out where it really came from. Rebecca, Richard called as I reached the door. If you pursue this, if you go to the authorities with your theories and stolen documents, you won't just be hurting me. You'll be destroying Natalie's future. Is your pride really worth more than your daughter's education? I turned back to face him. My daughter's future won't be built on lies and stolen money. She deserves better than that. She deserves better than you, Constance said, her voice cutting through the silence like a blade.
I walked out of that house knowing I'd just declared war on people with more money, more connections, and more to lose than I could possibly imagine. But I also walked out knowing that I'd rather stand alone with the truth than sit comfortably with a lie. Wednesday morning brought the kind of autumn chill that seeps into your bones and stays there. I was getting ready for work, standing in front of my bathroom mirror and trying to convince myself that I looked like someone who hadn't just declared war on her ex-husband's entire family, when the first strange call came in. Rebecca Crawford. The voice was professional, clipped, unfamiliar. It's Rebecca Mills now, I corrected automatically. I'd taken back my maiden name after the divorce, though apparently the Crawford family documents hadn't gotten that memo. Ms. Mills, this is Janet Hoffman from Riverside General Hospital's Human Resources Department. We need to schedule a meeting with you today regarding some irregularities in your employment file. My stomach dropped. I'd worked at Riverside General for 12 years, ever since the divorce. My employment record was spotless. Perfect attendance, no complaints, consistent positive reviews from supervisors. What kind of irregularities? I'd prefer to discuss this in person. Can you come in an hour early today? Say 7 a.m. The line went dead before I could ask any more questions. I stared at my reflection, seeing a woman who suddenly looked older than her 42 years age. This couldn't be a coincidence. Less than 24 hours after confronting the Crawford family, my job was somehow in jeopardy. I arrived at the hospital to find Janet Hoffman waiting in her sterile office with a thick manila folder and an expression that suggested I was already fired. Janet was one of those HR professionals who treated every interaction like a potential lawsuit, speaking in careful, measured tones that revealed nothing. Miss Mills, we have received some concerning information about potential financial improprieties involving your personal accounts and hospital vendor relationships. She slid a document across her desk. It was a printout of bank transactions showing regular deposits from Millbrook Medical Supply Company directly into an account bearing my name. The amounts were significant, $2,000 to $3,000 monthly for the past 3 years. I've never received money from Millbrook Medical Supply, I said, my voice steady despite the panic rising in my chest. I don't even know what that company does. They're one of our largest equipment vendors, and according to these records, you've been receiving what appears to be kickback payments for ensuring their bids are accepted over competitors. I stared at the documents, recognizing the same pattern I'd seen with the foundation paperwork. My name, my social security number, my address, all attached to financial transactions I knew nothing about. This is identity theft, I said. Someone is using my information for these transactions. Janet's expression didn't change. Miss Mills, these deposits correspond directly with major equipment purchases that you processed through the billing department. The correlation is quite clear. Correlation isn't causation, I said. Just because the timing matches doesn't mean I was involved. Nevertheless, we have to take these allegations seriously. I'm placing you on administrative leave pending a full investigation.
20 minutes later, I was walking out of the hospital where I had worked for over a decade, my access badge confiscated, my professional reputation in tatters. As I sat in my car in the parking lot, trying to process what had just happened, my phone rang again. This time it was Dr. Patricia Santos, the director of the nursing program at Millbrook Community College, where I'd been taking night classes for the past 2 years. Rebecca, I'm afraid I have some disappointing news. Your application for the RN program has been withdrawn. Withdrawn? I was accepted for the spring semester. I've already paid my deposit. We've received information suggesting that your prerequisite coursework may have been completed through fraudulent means, specifically your anatomy and physiology credits from Henderson University. Henderson University? I'd never attended Henderson University. I'd taken my prerequisite courses at 3 different community colleges over the course of 4 years, paying for each class out of pocket as I could afford them.
Dr. Santos, I've never been enrolled at Henderson University. All my transcripts are from community colleges. I can provide documentation. The transcripts show otherwise, Rebecca. I'm sorry, but we have to protect the integrity of our program. Your deposit will be refunded. Another door slammed shut. Another piece of my carefully constructed future crumbling. By noon, I was sitting in my apartment, staring at a pile of documents that painted me as either a master criminal or the victim of the most elaborate identity theft scheme I'd ever heard of. My phone had been ringing constantly. Creditors asking about accounts I'd never opened, a mortgage company confirming my application for a home loan I'd never requested, even a luxury car dealership thanking me for my recent purchase of a BMW I'd never seen. Someone was systematically destroying my life, and they were using my own identity to do it. Natalie came home from school to find me surrounded by printouts and legal documents, my laptop open to bank websites showing accounts that bore my name but contained my life savings multiplied by 10. Mom, what's all this? I looked up at my daughter, this young woman who'd been thrust into adulthood by circumstances neither of us had created. Someone is framing me, sweetheart. They're making it look like I've been stealing money, taking bribes, committing fraud. She sat down beside me on the couch, picking up one of the bank statements. This account shows a balance of $340,000. Mom, if you had this much money, we wouldn't be living in this apartment. Exactly. But try explaining that to HR departments and college admissions officers who are looking at official documents. Natalie was quiet for a moment, studying the papers scattered around us. This is Dad, isn't it? This is what he meant when he said you should be careful about making accusations. I nodded, though saying it out loud felt surreal. I think so. I think this is what happens when you threaten to expose Richard Crawford and his family. But Mom, this is insane. This is like something out of a movie. People don't really do this kind of stuff. People with money and connections do. People who have too much to lose if the truth comes out. My phone rang again. This time the caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize with a Washington, D.C. area code. Rebecca Mills? Yes? This is Agent David Chen with the FBI Financial Crimes Division. We'd like to speak with you about some unusual banking activity associated with your name and social security number. I felt the blood drain from my face. I was just about to call the FBI myself. Someone is using my identity to commit financial fraud. Ma'am, we'd prefer to discuss this in person. Are you available to meet with us this afternoon? Of course. But Agent Chen, I want you to know that I'm the victim here, not the perpetrator. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Ma'am, in cases like these, the distinction isn't always as clear as people think. We'll see you at 3 p.m. at the Federal Building downtown. After he hung up, I sat staring at the phone, realizing that somehow, in the span of 48 hours, I'd gone from being a struggling single mother trying to teach her daughter a lesson about respect to being under federal investigation for crimes I didn't commit. Natalie was looking at me with wide eyes. Mom, what if they don't believe you? What if they think you really did all this stuff? It was the same question I'd been asking myself. The evidence against me was overwhelming and professionally constructed. Bank records, vendor payments, fraudulent transcripts, all bearing my personal information, and all creating a clear pattern of criminal behavior. Then we fight, I said, though I had no idea how to fight against people with the resources to fabricate an entire criminal identity. But what if we lose? I looked at my daughter, 18 years old and facing the possibility that her mother might go to federal prison for crimes she didn't commit. Then at least we'll lose knowing we told the truth.
As I got ready to drive downtown for the most important meeting of my life, I realized that Richard's warning had been more than just a threat. It had been a promise. The Crawford family hadn't just rejected my accusations, they'd systematically destroyed my credibility, my career, and potentially my freedom. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd assumed I would back down when faced with the consequences of challenging them. They'd underestimated how far a mother would go to protect not just her daughter's future, but the truth itself.
What they didn't know was that their elaborate frame job had left traces, digital fingerprints, that might be more revealing than they realized. What they didn't anticipate was that creating false evidence of my criminal activity would eventually lead federal investigators not just to me, but to them. And what they definitely didn't expect was that by 3 p.m. that afternoon, I'd be sitting across from FBI agents not as a target, but as a witness to a conspiracy that reached far beyond anything I had imagined when I first walked out of that birthday party with a college fund in my hand. The federal building in downtown Millbrook Heights was an imposing concrete structure that made everyone who entered feel small and guilty of something. I sat in the waiting area outside Agent Chen's office, my hands folded tightly in my lap to stop them from shaking, watching federal employees move through the hallways with the kind of purposeful efficiency that suggested they dealt with criminals and conspiracies as routinely as most people dealt with grocery shopping. At exactly 3 p.m., Agent David Chen emerged from his office. He was younger than I'd expected, probably early 40s, with sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and the kind of intense focus that made me understand why people confessed to crimes they didn't commit just to escape the weight of his attention. Ms. Mills, thank you for coming in voluntarily. This is Agent Sarah Rodriguez from our white-collar crimes unit. Agent Rodriguez was a petite woman with steel gray hair and an expression that suggested she'd heard every lie, excuse, and sob story in the book. They led me into a small conference room with white walls, fluorescent lighting, and a recording device that Agent Chen activated with practiced efficiency. Ms. Mills, we're investigating irregularities in the financial records of several local charitable organizations, including the Millbrook Youth Education Foundation. Your name has appeared in connection with these irregularities. I took a deep breath. Agent Chen, before we go any further, I need you to understand that I'm the victim of identity theft. Someone has been using my personal information to create false financial records. Agent Rodriguez leaned forward. That's certainly possible, but we need to understand the timeline. When did you first become aware of these false records? Monday. My daughter found documents at her father's house showing donations attributed to me that I never made. Her father being Richard Crawford, vice president of the Millbrook Youth Education Foundation. Yes, my ex-husband. Agent Chen consulted a thick folder. Ms. Mills, according to bank records, you've made substantial donations to the foundation over the past 8 years. Can you walk us through your relationship with this organization? I don't have a relationship with them. I'd never heard of the Millbrook Youth Education Foundation until 3 days ago. But you are aware that your daughter was selected as one of their scholarship recipients. I blinked. What? Agent Rodriguez slid a document across the table. It was an official scholarship award letter dated 6 months ago, awarding Natalie Crawford a full 4-year scholarship to Whitmore University through the Millbrook Youth Education Foundation. The scholarship was worth $180,000. I never saw this, I said, studying the document. Natalie never mentioned a scholarship. We've been planning to use her college fund to pay for Whitmore. The college fund you withdrew on Saturday evening. Yes. The money I saved from my own paychecks over 18 years? Agent Rodriguez pulled out another document. Miss Mills, this college fund account shows deposits that far exceed what your employment history would suggest you could afford. Where did this additional money come from? My heart started racing as I looked at the bank statements they had obtained. The account that I thought contained my carefully saved $47,000 actually showed a balance of $127,000, with regular large deposits that I'd never made. I don't know, I whispered. Those deposits aren't from me. They're from the Millbrook Youth Education Foundation, specifically from scholarship funds that were supposed to go to other students. The room seemed to spin. You're saying someone used the foundation to funnel money into my daughter's college account? We're saying that money intended for underprivileged students ended up in an account bearing your name, and your daughter was simultaneously awarded a full scholarship that would make that college fund unnecessary. I stared at the documents, trying to process what they were telling me. Richard hadn't just been supplementing Natalie's college fund, he'd been stealing scholarship money from other students and hiding it in an account with my name on it. And then he'd arranged for Natalie to receive a separate scholarship so that the stolen money could be used for other purposes. Miss Mills,
Agent Rodriguez said gently. We need to know what you knew about this arrangement and when you knew it. I didn't know anything, I said, my voice barely audible. I thought I was saving money for my daughter's education. I thought I was being a responsible mother. Agent Chen opened another file. Can you explain these records showing regular cash deposits to your personal checking account? Deposits that correspond with scholarship disbursements from the foundation? They showed me bank records for my everyday checking account, the one I used for groceries and rent and car payments. Over the past 3 years, there were regular cash deposits of $500 to $800 that I'd never made. The dates aligned perfectly with my paydays, making it look like I was supplementing my hospital salary with money from the foundation. I never made those deposits, I said. Someone else had to have access to my account. Who else has access to your banking information, Miss Mills? I thought about it, my mind racing through the possibilities. Richard had my account information for child support payments. He had power of attorney during our marriage for financial matters. I never revoked it because there was never any reason to. Agent Rodriguez and Agent Chen exchanged glances. Miss Mills, are you telling us that your ex-husband has had legal authority to access your bank accounts for the past 8 years? I guess so. I never thought about it. After the divorce, he rarely paid child support anyway, so I just forgot about the paperwork. Agent Chen made a note. And you never noticed these additional deposits in your account? My account is usually close to zero by the end of each month. I live paycheck to paycheck. I don't scrutinize every transaction because there's never enough money to make a difference. It was embarrassing to admit, but it was true. When you're struggling to pay rent and buy groceries, you don't spend time analyzing bank statements for mysterious windfalls. Agent Rodriguez pulled out a laptop and turned it toward me. Miss Mills, we'd like you to look at some surveillance footage. The screen showed grainy black and white video from what appeared to be a bank ATM. A figure approached the machine, inserted a card, and made a deposit. The timestamp showed a date from 6 months ago. The figure was wearing a baseball cap and sunglasses, but something about the height and build looked familiar. Can you identify the person making this deposit to your account? I squinted at the screen, trying to make out features that were deliberately obscured. But there was something about the way the person moved, the particular way they held their shoulders, that I recognized. It looks like it could be Richard, I said slowly, but I can't be sure. Agent Chen paused the video. We have 12 different ATM recordings showing someone using your bank card to make deposits to your account, someone who clearly has access to your banking information and your physical debit card. But I have my debit card, I said, reaching for my purse. Miss Mills, it's not difficult to have duplicate cards made when you have power of attorney and access to someone's account. The full scope of what had been done to me was starting to become clear. Richard hadn't just used my identity to hide foundation money. He'd been actively manipulating my bank accounts, making deposits that would create a paper trail showing I was receiving payments from the foundation. When investigators looked at the records, it would appear that I was a willing participant in the scheme, receiving regular payments for my cooperation. There's something else, Agent Rodriguez said, pulling out another document. We've been investigating the Millbrook Youth Education Foundation for 18 months. This investigation began when several students who were supposed to receive scholarships reported that their funding had been canceled at the last minute, despite their eligibility remaining unchanged. She showed me a list of names, 12 high school students from working-class families who had qualified for foundation scholarships but never received them. Students like Maria Santos, whose mother cleaned office buildings, like Derek Johnson, whose father was disabled and couldn't work, like Amanda Chen, whose parents ran a struggling family restaurant. These students should have received the money that ended up in your daughter's college account. Money that was diverted through a series of shell accounts and false donations before being deposited under your name. I felt sick. Real students, kids who needed help getting to college, had been denied scholarships so that Richard could steal their money and hide it in accounts bearing my name. My daughter, who already had every advantage her father's wealth could provide, had unknowingly benefited from a scheme that hurt kids who had nothing. Miss Mills, Agent Chen said, we believe you're victim in this case, not a perpetrator, but we need your help to prove that Richard Crawford and others in his organization orchestrated the scheme.
What kind of help? Agent Rodriguez leaned forward. We need you to wear a wire.
The words hung in the air like a challenge. They wanted me to record conversations with Richard, to get him to admit to what he'd done, to provide evidence that could be used in court. If I do this, I said slowly, if I help you build a case against Richard, what happens to my daughter? She's applied to colleges. She has dreams. She doesn't deserve to have her future destroyed because of her father's crimes. Miss Mills, Agent Chen said gently, your daughter's future is already in jeopardy. This scholarship she received from the foundation is fraudulent. When this comes out publicly, Whitmore University will likely revoke her admission. The only way to protect her is to make sure the truth comes out and that she's clearly identified as an innocent victim, just like you. I thought about Natalie, sitting at home surrounded by documents that painted her mother as a criminal. I thought about the students who'd been denied scholarships they'd earned. I thought about Richard, living in his mansion, sending his daughter to expensive schools, all while stealing from kids who had nothing. What do you need me to do? The wire was smaller than I'd expected, no bigger than a button, taped carefully to my chest underneath my blouse by Agent Rodriguez in the back of an unmarked van parked 3 blocks from Richard's office. My hands wouldn't stop shaking as she adjusted the tiny microphone, testing the sound quality while Agent Chen monitored the feed from his laptop. Remember, Miss Mills, we need him to acknowledge the foundation's activities, ask about the scholarship money, about your bank accounts, about his access to your financial information. Let him explain how the system works. And if he doesn't want to talk, then push him. You're angry about what's happened to your job, your nursing program, your reputation. Use that anger. Make him defend what he's done. It had been 2 days since my meeting with the FBI, 2 days of Natalie and me living in a strange bubble, knowing that everything we thought we understood about our lives was wrong. She'd taken the news about the fraudulent scholarship better than I had expected, her anger at her father overriding any disappointment about losing her university admission. Mom, those kids who didn't get scholarships because of Dad, they're the ones we should be worried about, not me, she'd said, and I'd never been prouder of her moral clarity. Now, walking through the marble lobby of Crawford Development Group's headquarters, I tried to channel that clarity into courage. The building was a testament to Richard's success, 30 floors of glass and steel rising above downtown Millbrook Heights like a monument to ambition. The elevator whisked me to the 28th floor, where Richard's corner office commanded views of the entire city. His secretary, Monica, greeted me with the kind of professional smile that masked deep discomfort. Miss Mills, Mr. Crawford is expecting you. Richard was standing behind his massive oak desk when I entered, his back to me, as he gazed out at the city below. He'd always been theatrical, even during our marriage, and this display of power was pure Richard Crawford, the successful businessman surveying his domain. Rebecca, he said without turning around, I was wondering when you'd come crawling back. I'm not crawling anywhere. I'm here because my life has been systematically destroyed over the past week, and I want to know why. He finally turned, and I was shocked by how much he had aged since Tuesday's family meeting. His face was drawn, his usually perfect hair disheveled, and there were dark circles under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights. Your life? He laughed bitterly. Rebecca, do you have any idea what you've done? What your little tantrum at Natalie's party has cost? Enlighten me. He moved to the bar cart in the corner of his office and poured himself 3 fingers of whiskey, despite it being barely noon. The foundation is under federal investigation. My business is being audited. Constance has had to hire attorneys. Marcus's construction permits are being reviewed, all because you couldn't let sleeping dogs lie. All because I stumbled onto evidence of financial fraud, I corrected. Richard, they know about the scholarship money. They know about the fake deposits in my accounts. They know you've been stealing from students who actually need help. He drained the whiskey glass and set it down harder than necessary. Stealing is such an ugly word, Rebecca. What we've been doing is managing resources efficiently. By taking scholarship money meant for poor kids and hiding it in accounts with my name on them, By ensuring that foundation money goes where it can do the most good, he said, his voice taking on the lecturing tone I remembered from our marriage. Do you know how many of those scholarship recipients actually graduate from college, Rebecca? How many of them drop out after a semester or two because they can't handle the academic rigor? So you decided to steal their opportunities and give them to students like Natalie instead. I decided to invest in students with a real chance of success. Students from stable families with support systems. Students who won't waste the money on frivolous pursuits.
I stared at him, amazed by his ability to rationalize theft as social engineering. And you used my identity to hide the money trail? I used family resources to manage a complex financial situation, he said. The power of attorney you signed gave me complete access to your accounts. Everything I did was technically legal. Technically legal, but morally bankrupt, I said. Richard, you've been using my social security number to create fake donation records. You've been making deposits to my accounts without my knowledge. You've been filing tax documents in my name. That's identity theft. He moved back behind his desk, his composure beginning to crack. You think you're so righteous, don't you? Living in your little apartment, working your little job, struggling to make ends meet. Do you know what I've built while you've been playing the martyr? I know you've built it on the backs of students who deserved better. I've built it through intelligence and hard work, he said, his voice rising. I've created opportunities, provided jobs, contributed to this community in ways you could never understand. By stealing scholarship money? By redirecting resources to where they could be most effective. He slammed his hand on the desk. Rebecca, the foundation has helped dozens of students get excellent educations. Just because the money didn't go to the original intended recipients doesn't mean it was wasted. It went to students whose families could already afford college. Students like Natalie, who had a father with the money to pay for her education anyway. Natalie deserved every opportunity she received. She's exceptional. She's going places. Why shouldn't she benefit from foundation resources? Because other kids earned those scholarships fair and square, and you stole their futures to benefit your own daughter. Richard's face was flushed now, the whiskey and anger combining to strip away his usual polished facade. Those kids would have squandered the opportunities anyway. Kids from broken homes, from welfare families, from single mothers like you. They don't have the foundation necessary for real success. The contempt in his voice was breathtaking. This was what he really thought of people like me, of the students who'd been denied scholarships, of anyone who didn't have his advantages. So you decided to play God. You decided who deserved help and who didn't, based on your own prejudices about class and family structure. I made practical decisions based on likely outcomes. The foundation's success rate improved dramatically after I restructured the selection process. The foundation's success rate improved because you were giving scholarships to kids who would have succeeded anyway, kids whose families had money and connections. He sat down heavily in his chair. Rebecca, you forced our hand. When you started asking questions, when you took that college fund, when you began making accusations, we had to protect ourselves. We? The foundation board, the families involved, people with a lot to lose if this scheme came to light. So you decided to destroy me instead of stopping the fraud? We decided to discredit you before you could damage something that's helped dozens of deserving students get quality educations. Deserving according to who? You? The board members who benefit from keeping scholarship money within their own social circle? Deserving according to objective standards of academic achievement and family stability. But the words sounded hollow even to him. Richard, look me in the eye and tell me that Maria Santos didn't deserve her scholarship. Tell me that Derek Johnson, whose father is disabled and whose mother works 3 jobs, didn't earn his place at college. He couldn't meet my gaze.
You don't understand the complexities involved. I understand that you stole from kids who had nothing so that kids who had everything could have even more. I redirected resources to maximize their impact. You committed fraud, and when I discovered it, you tried to destroy my life to cover it up. Richard's phone buzzed. He glanced at it and his face went ashen. Rebecca, you need to leave, now. Why? What's wrong? He stood up abruptly, moving toward the window. There are federal agents in the lobby. This conversation is over. I remained seated. Richard, it's too late. They already know everything. The only question now is whether you're going to keep lying or finally tell the truth.
He spun around to face me, and for the first time since I'd known him, Richard Crawford looked genuinely afraid. Rebecca, what have you done? I stood slowly, smoothing my blouse over the wire that had recorded every word of our conversation. I've done what I should have done 18 years ago. I've stopped enabling your lies. The office door burst open and Agent Chen stepped in, followed by Agent Rodriguez and 2 other federal officers. Richard Crawford, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, identity theft, and violation of federal charity regulations. As they read him his rights, Richard looked at me with something between betrayal and grudging respect. You always were smarter than I gave you credit for, Rebecca. No, I said, watching as they cuffed the man I'd once loved, the father of my daughter, the person who tried to destroy my life to protect his secrets. I was just finally smart enough to stop trusting you. The aftermath of Richard's arrest hit Millbrook Heights like a Category 5 hurricane. By Thursday evening, the story was leading the local news, and by Friday morning, it had gone viral on social media. The footage of Richard Crawford being led away in handcuffs from his own office building played on every major network, accompanied by headlines that range from local charity scandal exposed to single mother takes down ex-husband's fraud empire. I should have felt vindicated. Instead, I felt like I was drowning. The first wave of retaliation came from sources I hadn't expected. Camille's sister, Jennifer, who worked as a guidance counselor at Natalie's high school, called Friday morning with barely contained venom in her voice. Rebecca, I hope you're satisfied. Natalie's college applications are being reviewed by every admissions office in the state. Her scholarship to Whitmore has been officially revoked. Her reputation is destroyed before she even graduates high school. Jennifer, Natalie is a victim in this too. She had no idea about her father's crimes. Natalie is guilty by association now, and you put her there. You could have handled this privately, worked something out with the family. Instead, you chose to destroy everyone. The line went dead, but the message was clear. To Richard's extended family and social circle, I wasn't a whistleblower who'd exposed fraud. I was a vindictive ex-wife who destroyed a respected businessman over a petty dispute. The social media response was equally brutal. Someone had leaked my phone number, and by noon Friday, I was receiving dozens of calls from reporters, angry foundation donors, and people who apparently appointed themselves judge and jury of my motivations. You ruined a good man because you were jealous of his success, one woman screamed into my voicemail. I hope you're happy now that you've destroyed innocent people's lives. Another caller, identifying herself as a Whitmore University alumna, left a message saying, your daughter doesn't deserve to go to college anywhere after what you've done to the foundation that helps deserving students. The irony was devastating. The foundation had been stealing from deserving students, but somehow I was the villain for exposing it. Natalie came home from school Friday afternoon looking shock-shelled. She dropped her backpack by the door and collapsed onto our worn couch without saying a word. How bad was it? I asked, sitting beside her. Everyone knows, Mom. Everyone. The kids whose parents are friends with the Crawfords won't even look at me.
My guidance counselor suggested I might want to consider taking a gap year to let things settle down. She was trying not to cry, but I could see the devastation in her 18-year-old eyes. This was supposed to be her senior year, the culmination of 12 years of academic achievement. Instead, she was being treated like a pariah because her father was a criminal and her mother exposed him. Mrs. Patterson in AP English pulled me aside after class. She said she was concerned about how this situation might affect my ability to focus on academics. She suggested I might want to drop down to regular English for the rest of the semester. That's ridiculous. Your grades have never been better. It doesn't matter, Mom. They're looking for excuses to distance themselves from us. Mrs. Patterson's husband works for Crawford Development. She can't afford to be seen supporting the daughter of the man who destroyed her husband's boss. The complexity of small-town politics was revealing itself in ways I hadn't anticipated. Richard's arrest wasn't just affecting our family, it was sending ripples through the entire social and economic structure of Millbrook Heights. People who'd invested in his projects, who'd worked for his companies, who'd benefited from the foundation's connections, were all suddenly vulnerable. And we were the lightning rod for their anger. Saturday brought a new level of harassment. Someone had spray-painted "traitor" across our apartment building's entrance. Our mailbox had been stuffed with anonymous letters, some threatening, others pleading with me to recant my accusations to save innocent people from suffering. The most disturbing letter came on official letterhead from Riverside General Hospital. Dr. Martin Wells, the chief of staff, wrote to inform me that my termination was now permanent, citing irreparable damage to professional relationships and concerns about trustworthiness in financial matters.
Miss Mills, the letter continued, while we acknowledge that criminal charges against you have been dropped, the hospital cannot ignore the impact this situation has had on our relationships with vendors, donors, and the community at large. Your continued employment would create an untenable working environment. I'd been officially fired not for any wrongdoing I'd committed, but for exposing wrongdoing others had committed. The hospital where I'd worked faithfully for 12 years was cutting me loose to protect their relationships with the same people who'd been defrauding charity funds. Natalie found me reading the letter at our kitchen table, and her face crumpled when she saw my expression. "Mom, this is all my fault. If I hadn't been so awful at my birthday party, if I hadn't called you embarrassing, none of this would have happened." I pulled her into a hug, this young woman who'd grown up so much in the past week. "Sweetheart, this started long before your birthday party. Your father has been committing crimes for years. The only thing that changed is that we finally found out about it. But if we just ignored it, if we just let him keep the money, then other kids would have kept getting cheated out of scholarships they earned. Maria Santos would still be working 2 jobs instead of going to college. Derek Johnson would still be believing that families like ours don't deserve opportunities." She pulled back to look at me. "But what about my opportunities, Mom? What college is going to accept me now? What happens to my future?" It was the question I'd been avoiding, the one that made my chest tight with panic every time I considered it. Natalie's dreams of becoming a doctor, her plans for pre-med at a prestigious university, her carefully constructed academic profile, all of it was now tainted by her association with the scandal. "We'll figure something out," I said, though I had no idea what that something might be. Sunday brought the worst blow yet. Agent Chen called with news that made my stomach drop. "Miss Mills, I need to inform you that several Foundation board members have hired attorneys and are planning to file a civil lawsuit against you for damages related to the exposure of the Foundation's activities." "Damages? What damages?" "They're claiming that your accusations and cooperation with federal investigators have caused irreparable harm to their reputations and businesses. They're seeking compensation for lost revenue, legal fees, and what they're calling emotional distress." I sat down heavily. "Agent Chen,
These are the people who committed crimes. How can they sue me for exposing their crimes? Because this is America, Miss Mills, and anyone can sue anyone for anything. Whether they'll win is another matter, but defending yourself against a civil suit filed by wealthy individuals with expensive attorneys is going to be costly and time-consuming. I don't have money for attorneys. I know, that's why I'm calling. The federal prosecutor's office may be able to provide some assistance, but you should understand that this is likely to get more difficult before it gets easier. After he hung up, I sat in the silence of our small apartment, trying to process the full scope of what we were facing: criminal investigation, civil lawsuits, social ostracism, financial ruin, and the destruction of my daughter's educational opportunities. The price of telling the truth had turned out to be everything I'd worked to build over the past 18 years. Natalie emerged from her bedroom where she'd been trying to work on college essays that suddenly seemed pointless. "Mom, maybe we should consider leaving," she said quietly. "Moving somewhere else, starting over where nobody knows about any of this." I looked at my daughter, this young woman who'd grown up so much in the past week. "Sweetheart, this started long before your birthday party. Your father has been committing crimes for years. The only thing that changed is that we finally found out about it. But if we just ignored it, if we just let him keep the money, then other kids would have kept getting cheated out of scholarships they earned. Maria Santos would still be working 2 jobs instead of going to college. Derek Johnson would still be believing that families like ours don't deserve opportunities." It was a fair question, the one that had been keeping me awake at night. What if Richard went to prison, but the system that enabled him remained intact? What if the stolen scholarship money was never returned to the students who deserved it? What if we sacrificed our future for a principle that ultimately made no difference? But then I thought about Maria Santos, working double shifts at a fast food restaurant because she couldn't afford college. I thought about Derek Johnson, whose disability benefits barely covered their family's basic needs. I thought about Amanda Chen, whose parents had sacrificed everything to give their daughter opportunities they'd never had. The cost of staying quiet would have been higher, I told Natalie. At least this way, we can look at ourselves in the mirror.
She nodded, but I could see the doubt in her eyes. At 18, idealism feels less important than practical concerns like college admissions and career prospects. As Sunday evening settled into night, I realized that we'd reached the point where good intentions and moral clarity weren't enough. We needed a strategy, resources, and allies if we were going to survive what was coming next. But looking around our small apartment with threatening letters stacked on the counter and my termination notice posted on the refrigerator, I had no idea where any of that help was going to come from. Monday morning arrived with a phone call that changed everything. I was sitting at our kitchen table, surrounded by job applications and legal documents, when Agent Rodriguez called with news that made my blood run cold. "Miss Mills, we have a problem. Richard Crawford's attorneys have filed a motion to suppress your recorded conversation, claiming entrapment and violation of attorney-client privilege. If they succeed, we lose our primary evidence against him." I gripped the phone tighter. How is that possible? He confessed to everything on tape. "His lawyers are arguing that you coerced him into making statements under false pretenses, and that some of his comments were protected communications with legal counsel. It's a long shot, but expensive attorneys sometimes win on technicalities." The implications hit me immediately. If the confession was thrown out, Richard would walk free. The foundation would continue operating. The students who had been cheated would never get justice. "There's something else," Agent Rodriguez continued. "We've received an offer through Richard's attorneys, a plea bargain that might interest you." "What kind of plea bargain?" "Richard admits to mismanagement of foundation funds, pays a fine, serves 6 months of home confinement, and makes restitution to affected students. In exchange, all charges against other foundation board members are dropped, and the civil lawsuit against you is withdrawn." I felt my stomach turn. "And what do I have to do?" "Sign a non-disclosure agreement, acknowledge that you may have misunderstood some of the foundation's financial practices,
Agree not to discuss the case publicly or cooperate with any future investigations. They want me to lie. They want you to walk away with your life intact. Miss Mills, if you take this deal, you get your job back at the hospital, your nursing school acceptance is reinstated, and your daughter's college prospects aren't permanently destroyed. I sat in silence, processing what she was telling me. After everything we'd been through, after all the harassment and threats and destruction of our lives, I was being offered a way out. All I had to do was pretend that Richard's crimes weren't as serious as they actually were. What happens to the students who were cheated out of scholarships? They'll receive some compensation from the restitution fund, not full scholarships, but something. And the foundation continues operating under new management with enhanced oversight, but yes, it continues. After Agent Rodriguez hung up, I sat staring at the phone, feeling the weight of an impossible decision. Take the deal and save our future, or refuse and risk losing everything for a principle that might not even matter in the long run. Natalie emerged from her bedroom, backpack slung over her shoulder, ready for another day of social exile at school. She looked exhausted, older than her 18 years, worn down by a week of being treated like a criminal for her father's crimes. Mom, I need to tell you something. She sat across from me at our small kitchen table. I've been thinking about what you said about truth being worth any cost. Okay. I don't think I'm strong enough for this. I know that makes me weak, but I'm not you. I can't handle having everyone hate me, having teachers look at me like I'm contaminated, having my entire future destroyed because Dad is a criminal. My heart ached for her. Sweetheart, you're not weak. You're 18 years old dealing with an impossible situation. Jessica Morrison's mom called our apartment last night while you were out getting groceries. She told me that if you dropped the charges against Dad, Jessica's family would help me get into their alma mater. They have connections, influence. I could still have a future. I studied my daughter's face, seeing the hope and desperation warring in her expression. What did you tell her? I told her I'd think about it. Mom, I know it's wrong, but I'm scared. I'm scared that we're going to lose everything and accomplish nothing, that Dad will get away with it anyway because he has expensive lawyers and we'll just be the collateral damage. Before I could respond, my phone rang again. This time, it was Dr. Wells from the hospital. Rebecca, I'm calling with an offer that might resolve this unfortunate situation for everyone involved. I'm listening. The hospital board has reviewed your case, and we believe there may have been some misunderstandings about your involvement in recent events. If you're willing to sign a statement clarifying that you had no knowledge of any impropriety involving hospital vendors, and if you agree to avoid any further public statements about the foundation matter, we're prepared to reinstate you with full back pay and benefits.
Another lifeline. Another way out of the hole I dug by insisting on the truth. Dr. Wells, I never had any knowledge of vendor impropriety because I wasn't involved in any vendor impropriety. Richard forged documents to make it look like I was taking kickbacks. Yes, well, the important thing is that we can put this behind us and move forward. Your nursing school acceptance can also be reinstated if you handle this matter discreetly. After he hung up, I looked at Natalie, who had clearly heard enough of the conversation to understand what was being offered. Mom, they're giving us a way out. We can have our old life back, plus better. You can become a nurse. I can go to college. We can stop living like criminals in our own town. By pretending your father didn't steal scholarship money from students who needed it. By accepting that sometimes the world is unfair and there's nothing we can do about it. Mom, you exposed the truth. You did the right thing. But now we have to think about survival. I walked to our living room window and looked out at Pinewood Gardens, at the modest lives being lived by people who worked hard and played by the rules and trusted that the system would be fair to them. People like Maria Santos's mother, who cleaned offices at night so her daughter could focus on academics. People like Derek Johnson's family, who'd never had the luxury of choosing principle over practicality. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Ms. Mills, this is Maria Santos.
I heard about what you did to expose the foundation. I wanted to thank you. Because of your courage, I'm getting a real scholarship to State University next fall. You gave me back my future." Another text followed immediately. "This is Derek Johnson's mom. I know this has been hard on your family, but what you did mattered. Derek starts at community college in January with foundation money that's actually going where it should. Thank you for not giving up." Then another. "Amanda Chen here. My parents want you to know that our whole family is grateful. I'm going to be the first person in our family to graduate from college because you refused to stay quiet." I showed the messages to Natalie, watching her face as she read them. "These kids got their scholarships because we exposed the truth," I said quietly. "But Mom, what about my scholarship? What about my future?" It was a fair question, and one that cut to the heart of everything. I'd sacrificed my daughter's opportunities to protect the opportunities of students I'd never met. I'd chosen universal principles over family loyalty. "Natalie, I need you to understand something. If we take these deals, if we pretend that what your father did wasn't serious, if we let the foundation go back to operating the way it was, then Maria and Derek and Amanda won't be the only students who benefit, but they might be the last ones. You don't know that. I know that systems don't change themselves. I know that people with money and power don't voluntarily give up advantages unless they're forced to." She was quiet for a long moment, staring at the text messages on my phone. "So, you're saying we have to sacrifice our future for theirs?" "I'm saying we have to decide what kind of people we want to be. Do we want to be people who take the comfortable path when it's offered? Or do we want to be people who stand up for what is right, even when it costs us everything?" Natalie looked around our small apartment at the life we had built together through 18 years of struggle and sacrifice. "And if we choose to keep fighting, if we refuse these deals, what happens to us?" "I don't know," I admitted. "Maybe we lose everything. Maybe the lawsuits destroy us financially. Maybe you don't get to go to college right away. Maybe I never become a nurse. But maybe we can live with ourselves? Maybe we can live with ourselves." She nodded slowly, and I saw something shift in her expression. The scared teenager was still there, but so was a young woman who was beginning to understand the difference between the price of something and its value. "Mom, if we're going to do this, if we're going to keep fighting, then we need to do it right. No more half measures, no more hoping someone else will fix things. If we're going to take on people with money and power, we need to be smarter than them." "What do you mean?" "I mean, we tell our story. All of it. Not just to federal agents and lawyers, but to everyone. Social media, local news, anyone who will listen. We make it impossible for them to bury this quietly." I stared at my daughter, amazed by her transformation from entitled teenager to strategic thinker. "Natalie, if we do that, there's no going back. They'll come after us with everything they have. Then we'd better make sure we have the truth on our side." I picked up my phone and scrolled through the contacts until I found Agent Rodriguez's number. "Agent Rodriguez, this is Rebecca Mills. I'm calling about the plea bargain offer." "Yes, Ms. Mills. Have you made a decision?"
I looked at Natalie, who nodded with the kind of determination I'd never seen in her before. "Yes, I have. Tell Richard Crawford's attorneys that he can take his deal and shove it. We're going to trial." The federal courthouse in downtown Springfield was nothing like the sterile FBI building where this journey had begun 3 months ago. Built in the 1920s with marble columns and vaulted ceilings, it carried the weight of decades of justice served and denied. As I walked up the courthouse steps on the first day of Richard's trial, reporters thrust microphones toward my face, and camera flashes exploded around us like lightning. "Miss Mills, do you have any regrets about exposing your ex-husband? Rebecca, how does it feel to see the father of your daughter in federal court? Are you concerned about the impact this trial will have on your family?" I kept my head down and pushed through the crowd, Natalie beside me with her own wall of determined silence. Agent Rodriguez had warned us about the media circus, but the reality was overwhelming. This wasn't just a federal fraud trial anymore. It had become a national story about family loyalty, institutional corruption, and the price of speaking truth to power.
Inside the courtroom, the battle lines were clearly drawn. Richard sat at the defense table in an expensive navy suit, flanked by 3 attorneys whose hourly rates probably exceeded my monthly rent. He looked thinner than when I'd last seen him, his face gaunt and his once perfect hair showing streaks of gray that hadn't been there before his arrest. Behind him sat the Crawford family power structure. Constance in the front row wearing pearls and an expression of martyred dignity, Marcus and Linda whispering with their own legal team, Camille dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief as if she were the grieving widow rather than the co-conspirator who'd helped orchestrate the cover-up. On our side of the courtroom, the seating was sparser, but no less meaningful. Maria Santos sat with her mother, both of them wearing their best clothes for this formal occasion. Derek Johnson had driven down from State University, where he was now a sophomore studying engineering, thanks to the scholarship money that had finally reached its intended recipient. Amanda Chen sat with her parents, her father having closed his restaurant for the day to witness the trial of the man who'd tried to steal his daughter's future. The federal prosecutor, Assistant U.S. Attorney Sarah Mitchell, was a woman in her 40s with steel gray hair and the kind of focused intensity that suggested she'd built her career on cases exactly like this one. During her opening statement, she laid out the scope of Richard's crimes with methodical precision. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, over the past 6 years, the defendant Richard Crawford systematically stole more than $800,000 in scholarship funds intended for deserving students from low-income families. He used his position as vice president of the Millbrook Youth Education Foundation to redirect these funds through a complex network of shell accounts, ultimately benefiting students whose families were already wealthy enough to afford college tuition. She clicked a remote, and the courtroom's large screen displayed a flowchart showing the movement of money from legitimate donors through the foundation to accounts bearing my name and others. The defendant didn't just steal money, he stole dreams. He stole opportunities. And when his ex-wife discovered evidence of his crimes, he attempted to destroy her life through systematic identity theft and fraud, creating false documents to make her appear complicit in his scheme. Richard's lead attorney, Jonathan Kellerman, was everything I had expected from a lawyer who charged $800 an hour. Silver-haired, perfectly dressed, and possessing the kind of commanding presence that made juries want to believe whatever he told them. His opening statement painted Richard as a dedicated philanthropist whose only crime was caring too much about educational outcomes. Ladies and gentlemen, my client Richard Crawford has devoted his life to helping young people achieve their educational dreams. The Millbrook Youth Education Foundation has helped hundreds of students attend college over the past decade. Yes, Mr. Crawford made some administrative decisions that may appear irregular when taken out of context, but his motivation was always to ensure that scholarship money went to students most likely to succeed. It was a masterful performance, transforming theft into altruism and fraud into misguided benevolence. I watched the jurors' faces, trying to gauge their reactions, but their expressions remained carefully neutral. The prosecution's case unfolded over 4 days of testimony that laid bare the full scope of Richard's crimes. Agent Chen testified about the digital forensics that had tracked money through multiple accounts. Agent Rodriguez explained how the identity theft scheme had been designed to frame me as a co-conspirator. Bank officials testified about the forged documents and unauthorized account access. But the most powerful testimony came from the students themselves. Maria Santos took the stand on Wednesday morning, wearing a simple black dress and speaking in a voice that carried across the silent courtroom. I worked 2 jobs during my senior year of high school. I cleaned office buildings at night and worked at a grocery store on weekends. My grades were perfect. My SAT scores were in the top percentile, and my essay about overcoming poverty was accepted by 3 different universities. But when scholarship season came, I kept getting rejection letters from foundations I thought I qualified for.
The prosecutor asked her to explain the impact of not receiving expected scholarship funding. I had to turn down my acceptance to Northwestern University because I couldn't afford the tuition. I was planning to work for 2 years to save money before trying again for college. I thought I wasn't good enough, that maybe students like me just weren't meant for places like Northwestern. And what happened when the FBI investigation revealed that your scholarship money had been redirected? Maria's voice strengthened. I learned that I was good enough, that I had earned those scholarships fair and square, that someone had stolen my opportunities, but not my potential. Derek Johnson's testimony was equally compelling. He testified about growing up in a household where his father's disability benefits barely covered basic necessities, about studying by candlelight when the electricity was shut off, about believing that his family's financial struggles disqualified him from dreaming about college. When I found out that my scholarship money had been given to students whose parents could already afford to send them to college, I felt like I had been robbed twice, he said. First of the money, and then of years of believing I wasn't worthy of help. Richard's defense team tried to discredit the student testimony by suggesting that the scholarship recipients might not have succeeded academically anyway, that Richard's reallocation of funds had actually improved educational outcomes by supporting students from stable families. It was a strategy that backfired spectacularly when Amanda Chen took the stand on Thursday afternoon. Defense counsel seems to believe that students from immigrant families or single-parent households are poor academic risks, she said, her voice calm but cutting. I'd like to point out that I graduated summa cum laude from State University and am currently in my second year of medical school. Maria Santos is on track to graduate with honors in biochemistry. Derek Johnson was just accepted to graduate school in engineering. We weren't poor investments. We were stolen opportunities that finally got the chance to prove our worth. The defense's case relied heavily on character witnesses testifying to Richard's philanthropic work and community involvement. Business leaders praised his vision for economic development. Foundation board members described him as dedicated and hardworking. Camille testified tearfully about his commitment to helping young people achieve their dreams. But their most damaging witness was supposed to be their strongest. When Constance Crawford took the stand on Friday afternoon, Kellerman clearly expected her testimony to humanize Richard and paint me as a vindictive ex-wife seeking revenge. Instead, her aristocratic contempt for people she considered beneath her social station came through clearly. Rebecca was always difficult, she testified, her voice dripping with disdain. She had ideas above her station. She thought she deserved things that, frankly, she hadn't earned. The prosecutor's cross-examination was surgical in its precision. Mrs. Crawford, when you say Rebecca had ideas above her station, what exactly do you mean? I mean she expected to be treated as if she belonged in our social circle when clearly she didn't. And what qualifications does one need to belong in your social circle? Breeding, education, family background, the things that matter. Things like working 3 jobs to save for your daughter's education? That's not the same as belonging. Things like exposing fraud and theft? Kellerman objected, but the damage was done. Constance had revealed the entitled worldview that had made the scholarship theft seem acceptable to the Crawford family. My own testimony came on Monday of the second week. I'd been dreading it for months, knowing that Kellerman would try to paint me as a bitter ex-wife motivated by jealousy and revenge. But sitting in that witness chair, looking out at the jury and the gallery filled with students whose futures had been stolen, I found a strength I hadn't known I possessed. Ms. Mills, Prosecutor Mitchell asked, why did you decide to cooperate with the FBI investigation? Because I realized that staying quiet meant that other students would be cheated out of opportunities they'd earned. Because I understood that my silence was enabling theft from families who couldn't afford to have their dreams stolen. Kellerman's cross-examination was aggressive, trying to establish that I'd acted out of spite rather than principle. Ms. Mills, isn't it true that you were angry about your daughter's treatment at her birthday party? Yes, I was hurt by my daughter's behavior. And isn't it true that you took the college fund in a moment of anger? Yes, I acted impulsively. And isn't it true that when your ex-husband asked you to return the money, you refused out of spite? I looked directly at the jury. Mr. Kellerman, when I learned that the college fund contained money stolen from students who needed it more than my daughter did, keeping it would have made me complicit in theft. That's not spite. That's integrity. The trial concluded with closing arguments that crystallized the fundamental question at stake.
Was this a case about a devoted father who'd made some administrative errors while trying to help students succeed? Or was it about a privileged man who'd systematically stolen from the poor to benefit the wealthy?
The defendant wants you to believe that stealing is acceptable if you steal from the right people, Prosecutor Mitchell told the jury. He wants you to believe that some students are more deserving than others based not on their achievements, but on their family circumstances. He wants you to believe that fraud is philanthropy if it's committed by someone with good intentions. But the law doesn't recognize a good intentions exception to theft, and justice doesn't have a sliding scale based on social status. After 3 hours of deliberation, the jury returned with their verdict. On the charge of conspiracy to commit wire fraud, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of identity theft, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of violation of federal charity regulations, we find the defendant guilty. Richard's sentencing hearing was scheduled for 6 weeks later. As court adjourned and the media swarmed the courthouse steps, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: relief mixed with exhaustion. But as I watched federal marshals escort Richard back to detention, I realized that the legal victory was only the beginning. The real work of rebuilding our lives and ensuring that other students didn't face the same injustices was just starting. 6 months after Richard's sentencing hearing, where he received 4 years in federal prison and was ordered to pay $1.2 million in restitution, I stood in the main lecture hall at Millbrook Community College, looking out at an audience of 200 people who'd come to hear me speak about whistleblower protection and institutional accountability. It wasn't a life I could have imagined when I walked out of that birthday party with a college fund in my hand. Back then, I was just a single mother trying to teach her spoiled daughter a lesson about respect. Now, apparently, I was someone people wanted to hear from about courage and moral responsibility. The transformation hadn't been easy or immediate. The months following the trial had been a difficult period of rebuilding everything we'd lost while learning to navigate our new reality as public figures in a very small town. My job at Riverside General was never reinstated. Despite Richard's conviction proving my innocence of any wrongdoing, Dr. Wells had been politely apologetic, but ultimately unmoved during our final meeting. Rebecca, while we acknowledge that the criminal investigation cleared you of any actual misconduct, the hospital board feels that the publicity surrounding this case makes your continued employment complicated. We've decided to offer you a generous severance package and an excellent reference for future opportunities. I'd taken the severance money and used it to complete my nursing degree at State University, commuting 45 minutes each way to avoid the whispers and stares that still followed me around Millbrook Heights. It took me an extra year taking night classes while working part-time at a medical clinic in the next county, but I finally became a registered nurse at 43 years old. The day I received my nursing license in the mail, Natalie and I celebrated with cheap champagne and takeout Chinese food in our same small apartment. We'd talked about moving somewhere else, starting fresh where nobody knew our story, but ultimately decided that running away felt too much like letting the Crawford family win. Natalie's path had been more complicated. Her acceptance to Whitmore University was permanently revoked, and several other schools had quietly withdrawn their offers once the scandal became public. For a few dark months, it seemed like her dreams of becoming a doctor were over before they'd really begun. But Maria Santos had introduced us to Dr. Elena Vasquez, an admissions counselor at State University who specialized in helping students from challenging circumstances. Dr. Vasquez had been following our story and reached out personally to offer Natalie a place in State's pre-med program with a full merit scholarship. Your daughter's test scores and grades speak for themselves, Dr. Vasquez had told us during our campus visit. The fact that she showed integrity under pressure only makes her a more attractive candidate for medical school. Now, as I prepared to give my speech,
I could see Natalie in the third row wearing her state university sweatshirt and looking every inch the confident pre-med student she'd become. She was thriving academically, had made friends who respected her for her character rather than her father's bank account, and had found her passion in pediatric medicine. The most unexpected development had been the foundation that emerged from the wreckage of Richard's crimes. The Millbrook Student Justice Foundation, established with the restitution money and additional donations from people who'd followed our story, was now providing scholarships to students who'd been overlooked by traditional programs. Derek Johnson served on the board while finishing his master's degree in engineering. Maria Santos was working on establishing a mentorship program for first-generation college students. Amanda Chen, now in her residency at Children's Hospital, had created a fund specifically for students from immigrant families. Ms. Mills, the event coordinator, approached me backstage. "We're ready to begin." I walked to the podium, looking out at an audience that included students, parents, educators, and community members. In the back, I spotted Agent Rodriguez, who'd become something of a friend over the months of investigation and trial preparation.
2 years ago, I began, I thought the worst thing that could happen to me was being embarrassed by my daughter at a birthday party. I thought taking away her college fund would teach her a lesson about gratitude and respect. I had no idea that the simple act of parental discipline would expose a conspiracy that had been stealing opportunities from deserving students for years. I had no idea that my ex-husband had been using my identity to commit fraud. And I definitely had no idea that speaking up about it would cost us nearly everything we'd worked to build. I paused, looking at Natalie, who smiled encouragingly. But here's what I learned. Sometimes the cost of staying silent is higher than the cost of speaking up. Sometimes the comfortable path leads nowhere, while the difficult path leads to places you never imagined you could go. I told them about Maria Santos, now a senior at State University with plans to attend medical school, about Derek Johnson, whose engineering innovations were already being recognized by his professors, about Amanda Chen, whose work with underserved patients was making headlines in medical journals. These students didn't need charity, I explained. They needed justice. They needed someone to recognize that they'd earned their opportunities fair and square. They needed the system to work the way it was supposed to work. I talked about the investigation, the trial, the months of harassment and financial struggle. I was honest about the cost, the lost job, the social ostracism, the civil lawsuits that had dragged on for months before finally being dismissed. People ask me if I regret exposing my ex-husband's crimes, I said. They ask if it was worth destroying my family, my daughter's college prospects, my career, my comfortable life in Millbrook Heights. I looked out at the audience, seeing faces that reflected the diversity of experiences that made up our community. Young and old, wealthy and struggling, privileged and overlooked. And here's my answer. I didn't destroy my family. I revealed what was already broken. I didn't ruin my daughter's prospects. I showed her what real success looks like. And I didn't sacrifice my comfortable life. I discovered that comfort built on other people's suffering isn't worth having. The response was immediate, sustained applause that filled the lecture hall. But more meaningful to me were the individual conversations that followed. A young woman approached me afterward, tears in her eyes. "Miss Mills, I'm a sophomore at State, and I received one of the Justice Foundation scholarships. I just wanted to thank you. My family owns a small farm, and without that scholarship, college would have been impossible." An older man shook my hand firmly. "I'm a high school counselor in the next county. What you did has changed how we talk to students about fairness and systems. You've given us language for explaining that sometimes good people have to do difficult things." A teenager with her parents stopped to introduce herself. "I'm applying for college next year, and my essay is about your story, about how ordinary people can choose to do extraordinary things when they see injustice."
As the crowd dispersed and I packed up my notes, Natalie joined me at the front of the lecture hall. "Mom, I have something to tell you," she said, her voice carrying a familiar mix of excitement and nervousness. "What is it, sweetheart?" "I got my MCAT scores back today. I scored in the 95th percentile." I pulled her into a hug, this young woman who'd grown from an entitled teenager into someone I was proud to call my daughter. "That's wonderful, Nat. You've worked so hard for this." "There's something else. I've decided I want to specialize in pediatric oncology. I want to work with kids who are fighting battles they didn't choose, who need advocates, who deserve someone in their corner." I understood what she was really saying. The experience of watching her father steal from vulnerable students, of seeing how systems could be manipulated to benefit the privileged while harming the powerless, had shaped her into someone who wanted to fight for people who couldn't fight for themselves. "Your father called last week," I told her, as we walked toward the parking lot. "From prison. He wanted to know if you'd be willing to visit him." "What did you tell him?" "I told him that was your decision to make." She was quiet for a moment, considering. "I think I will visit him. Not to forgive him, but to understand how someone can convince themselves that stealing from poor kids is acceptable. I think it might help me be a better doctor someday." As we drove home through the streets of Millbrook Heights, past the country club where this all began and the apartment complex where we still lived, I reflected on how much had changed and how much had stayed the same. We still lived modestly. I still worked hard for everything we had. We still faced whispers and sideways glances from people who thought I should have stayed quiet and kept the family secrets buried.
But we also lived honestly. We slept well at night knowing we'd done the right thing, even when it was hard. And we'd learned that integrity isn't something you can buy or inherit. It's something you have to choose, again and again, especially when that choice costs you everything. The college fund I'd taken in anger had become something bigger than I'd ever imagined. It had become a catalyst for justice, a pathway to truth, and proof that sometimes the most important battles are fought not by heroes, but by ordinary people who decide they can't stay silent anymore. As we pulled into our parking space at Pinewood Gardens, Natalie turned to me and smiled. "Mom, do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't taken that money that night?" I thought about it for a moment. Maria Santos would be working 2 jobs instead of studying biochemistry. Derek Johnson would still believe he wasn't smart enough for college. Amanda Chan would be wondering if immigrant families like hers deserved help. And us? We'd still be living with your father's lies. We'd still be benefiting from money stolen from kids who needed it more than we did. We'd still be the kind of people who look the other way when the system is unfair, as long as it's unfair in our favor. She nodded thoughtfully. So, even though it cost us everything, we actually gained something more important. We gained the ability to look at ourselves in the mirror and like what we see. That night, as I sat at our small kitchen table grading papers from the medical ethics course I now taught part-time at the community college, I realized that taking Natalie's college fund had been the best parenting decision I'd ever made. Not because it taught her humility, though it had. Not because it exposed Richard's crimes, though that mattered. But because it showed both of us that we were the kind of people who would choose difficult truths over comfortable lies, who would sacrifice our own advantages to protect other people's rights, who would stand up for justice even when justice was expensive. The college fund was long gone, spent on legal fees and living expenses during the months when I couldn't find work. But the education it had ultimately provided about courage, integrity, and the real meaning of success was worth more than any tuition money could ever buy. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.